but we're going to talk now about Police Scotland, because they've been accused of targeting Harry Potter author JK Rowling at an official hate crime event in February. It's believed that attendees were presented with a fictional character called Jo, who is a passionate gender-critical campaigner and calls for transgender people to be sent to, wait for it, gas chambers. Women's groups claim the fictional situation is the parody of the famed writer, but Police Scotland say they're not instructing officers to target actors, comedians or the like as part of its hate crime training. Of course, there have been major changes to hate crime legislation in Scotland as well. And joining me now is the former Metropolitan Police Detective Superintendent, Shabnam Chaudhri. Shabnam, thanks for coming into the studio. How much do you think this is conspiracy theory, and how much is it an unhappy coincidence that this apparently thinly veiled parody of the Harry Potter author, her Christian name, of course, is Joanne. She's known as Jo, and she is one of the most well-known gender-critical people.
Well, I think actually it's been quite sloppy of Police Scotland. When these groups come in to deliver their training, they really should have some checks and balances in place, because they need to show that they're impartial and that they're not really necessarily targeting anybody individual. And if they're taking examples of particular cases that are ongoing, that I have huge public sort of interest, Police Scotland should have really probably done some checks and balances before that training was delivered. It's not actually Police Scotland training. I think it was an LGBT event held by the LGBT Police Association and Time for Inclusion Agency, which is another.
But it's actually supplied to police.
It's supplied to police officers, and it's not part of their formal training because they get separate training for the new legislation that's coming in. So I think actually what they should have probably done was had a look at the kind of training that was going to be delivered to the youth engagement team, as I understand, that were coming at young people that was going to be delivered to. Police officers need to be impartial. They need to understand and know their legislation. And I'm not sure that by targeting a particular scenario that it's got real similarities to what's been going on in the public. It's a bit too close for comfort. It is a bit too close.
But it does illustrate the wider issue of hate crime legislation, because things are changing dramatically in Scotland, and actually in England and Wales there are different scenarios and indeed freedoms in terms of being able to have free speech in that regard. So actually something that could, in theory, get you arrested in Scotland could actually be protected speech in England and Wales. How on earth do police officers begin to deal with this?
Well, they've got to understand the legislation. They're not going to get this right when if this legislation is first introduced, I think it's the 1st of April, as I understand it. I think there's going to be quite a few mistakes. I think they're going to be under the watch of Big Brother, so to speak. And I think that they're going to have to take some really strong advice from the Crown Prosecution Services, ensure that they understand the legislation. And they've got to be make decisions, very quick time decisions, in order to go and investigate those kinds of allegations. So I think it's let's see what happens in the near future, how that impacts on Scotland and how that then impacts on the other parts of the UK.
Let's talk about another police-related story, and this is about the charity Refuge, a women's charity, which is calling for all police officers and staff accused of violence against women and girls, so not convicted but accused, to be automatically suspended while claims are investigated. Is that something, certainly in the wake of Wayne Couzens, in the wake of so many horrendous cases of violence against women, and so many officers, certainly in the Metropolitan Police, your old force, who seem to be suspended, convicted of things? This just seems to go on. Do you think an automatic suspension is the way forward?
I don't actually. I also don't think that any kind of violence against women and girls should be trivialised, but I think that you need to look at the factors relating to each and every case, and I think they need to be treated on their merits. I think that to suspend every single officer is probably unrealistic, and I don't think that that will even happen within policing. The decision to suspend is quite a serious decision, and it's made by very senior officers, but they should do their checks and balances in terms of ensuring that those officers that are being accused, whether there's any previous history in terms of any kind of information or intelligence, what role are they performing, how does that impact on public trust and confidence, particularly of women and girls, and is there another job that they could be doing, i.e. a desk job?
So you confine them perhaps to desk duty, so they're not interacting with the public, for example?
Look, whilst I fully support that, I don't think it's realistic, and I know that they've had 50,000 signatures today, but I think that's going to be very difficult and a big ask. And
this is the petition that's been presented to Downing Street on this issue.
Yes,
but I mean,
correct.
Really, trust in the police force is such and all the different police forces around. We're talking about Police Scotland, we're talking about the Met and many others that have been in the eye of the storm here, and rightly so in some senses. But surely this plan by Refuge to simply suspend people might actually increase confidence in the police, or do you think people might be deliberately targeted?
I don't think it's just about suspending those officers, because actually what you have to look at is how did they come to that point of being suspended, and that's actually not going to solve the issues within policing around misogyny, sexism, racism, because those officers could still be displaying red flag behaviours, and it's at the early stages that they need to be nipped in the bud, that they need to be identified, that they need to be challenged, and they need to be dealt with robustly. So by suspending those officers, and also we also know through policing that some officers are protected and that they're allowed to go unchecked, and they get away with that sort of behaviour.
It's always the way in every organisation.
While suspended.
There are some people who are just protected. What was your experience in regard to misogyny, sexism, perhaps even racism within the Metropolitan Police?
I think, unfortunately, what happened in my early stages of policing, I was kind of complicit with that kind of behaviour. And I don't mean as in I was dishing it out with officers. I accepted it as being the norm, as banter, because in your early stages of policing, you just want to get on. When I did whistleblow, then that went completely against me for the rest of my service. So it's very, very difficult for those officers to actually stand up and actually challenge those individuals. And within the Met, I know that they are doing a lot of work to ensure that officers have safe spaces where they can complain about others without them being isolated, subjected to victimisation and intimidation and investigation themselves.
Well, you made it to detective superintendent, so you clearly didn't do too badly.
No, I'm very proud of where I got to.
As absolutely you should be. Listen, thank you very, very much indeed. That's Shabnam Chaudhri, who is a former Metropolitan Police Detective Superintendent. Thanks so much for coming in.